What if a war designed to bring stability became the greatest wealth generator for a select few? The names ring like a ledger of modern Afghan power. Shirzian, Karzian, Atanur, Qasim Fahim, Abdullah, Kanuni, Zakilwal, Muslim Yar, Zahir Qadir, Rashid Dostum. They represent the small, exclusive circle of people and families who, during the 2 decades of conflict in Afghanistan, amassed unimaginable fortunes, while countless others lost their lives, their homes, and their most basic human rights. These individuals found a way to profit from the massive global investment. The United States spent an astounding $2.1 trillion in both Iraq and Afghanistan. During the peak years, this amounted to a staggering $300 million per day. Yet, this immense financial flow evaporated into a void, failing to lift the masses out of despair. The contrast is stark. For many, life was reduced to a desperate struggle for survival against dire poverty, leading to the heartbreaking question, when we die, how will we live? But in this environment of widespread scarcity, a few audacious figures managed to conjure a better world for themselves. How did so much money vanish? These elites spent their wealth extravagantly, buying luxury goods and erecting gleaming glass towers on the affluent shores of the Persian Gulf. Unofficial estimates suggest that Afghan officials and their associates held at least $6.5 billion in assets in Dubai alone. This capital flight highlights the failure of the investment to stabilize the country, as the funds essentially bypass the economy. Why is this wealth so difficult to track? In Afghanistan, a pervasive lack of transparency makes documenting the illicit activities of powerful, corrupt officials nearly impossible. These individuals are entrenched, wielding immense influence, and possess the ability to silence investigators with ease. Furthermore, a disturbing pattern emerged. The national media, which should have been conducting investigative reports, was compromised. Many outlets openly accepted financial support from these same corrupt figures, diverting attention from their crimes. The power of this wealth even allowed them to own and control the television channels that were supposed to hold them accountable. What happens when the watchdog is chained by the criminal? The answer is unchecked corruption, which became a foundational feature of the war economy. This systemic corruption brings us directly to the astonishing stories of individuals who became wealthy on the back of the war effort. The narrative of Fahim Hashim, though not a traditional veteran, is a quintessential example of a war millionaire. His journey began modestly in 2003 as a translator for American forces. He quickly recognized the enormous volume of translation work, and, using small initial investments, established his own company. His first major American contract, reportedly worth $600,000, involved rudimentary construction work, like building balustrades and roofing. Over the subsequent 20 years, his enterprises exploded in value, reportedly reaching a staggering worth of $200 million this year. This wealth allowed him to acquire significant properties and even launch an airline in the Gulf region in 2011, alongside numerous other logistics and construction companies, securing huge profits from American spending. But our focus must now shift to an even more aggressive player, Fahim Hashim's son, Hikmat Shadman. Hikmat, too, started as a translator before evolving into a major military contractor. A recent report by The New Yorker revealed that Shadman amassed $168 million through these contracts. Shadman pioneered a dark trend, demanding bribes from foreign entities to facilitate their business. Though publicly declaring his innocence, the New Yorker report accused Shadman of extracting immense sums from major U.S. contractors like Razik Shirzai, the Vatan Group, and other private security companies with strong political influence. How did this translator become one of the most powerful middlemen in the war? By exploiting the urgency and lack of oversight in American contracting. The pressure on these contractors was immense, revealing the deep penetration of Shadman's power. At one point, Americans detained Shadman, causing him such duress that he required hospitalization. In a truly shocking accusation, Shadman was even alleged to have funneled money to the Taliban to protect his operations and attack the facilities of his rivals in Qatar. Shadman's alleged schemes ultimately cost the American effort an estimated $850 million. This corruption eventually led to legal action. In 2019, years after the height of his influence, a court in Washington, D.C. finally ordered Shadman to pay $5.7 million in restitution. This case was a rare but telling window into the massive scale of illicit profits. Shadman's story was not an isolated incident. It was representative of a wider system that funneled U.S. development and security funds into the hands of the politically connected. The Vatan Group was another notorious beneficiary, implicated in the misappropriation of between $500,000 and $850 million from American funds in 2018 alone. The New York Times identified a major shareholder of the Vatan Group as Qayyum Karzai, the brother of the former president, with Rashid Bhopal serving as the CEO. Another powerful entity was NCL Holdings, controlled by Rahim Wardak and his son, Hamid Wardak, alongside Elliott Security Services. It is essential to understand how fundamentally the landscape of corruption changed. A key difference from the Soviet era was that the Soviets consciously avoided giving contracts to the relatives and kin of their high-level political figures. The Americans, however, embraced this practice. The former translators Hikmat Shadman and Fahim Hashemi were just a small part of a vast network that included companies owned by the families of political heavyweights like Rahim Wardak, Gulaga Sherzai Sibgatullah Mojadedi, and Atta Muhammad Noor, who all did well from the infusion of American money. Why did the U.S. turn a blind eye to this system? The immediate need for local cooperation often trumped the long-term goal of fostering good governance. These politically connected companies were often accused of providing inadequate, substandard, or entirely non-existent services, such as warehouses, yet they were consistently paid large sums. They were accused of not having a strong system in place and providing little more than empty buildings to the government. The prevailing theory was that this lack of oversight and a weak system in Afghanistan allowed the contracts to be weaponized for personal gain. In a truly paradoxical twist, some of these same corrupt companies were later promoted as leaders in reform, effectively placing the criminals in charge of cleaning up their own mess. These companies were accused of opposing the wares and goods of the government to maintain their leverage. How far up the chain did this corruption go? The human cost of this breakdown is immense. The UN has highlighted a tragic figure. 11.5% of Afghans die within 24 hours due to various hardships. This devastation occurred even as hundreds of millions were siphoned away. A disturbing cultural gap also existed, with the Washington Post reporting on the shocking salary disparity, noting that Americans paid $100,000 a month to their friends, sometimes more than 60,000 times what an Afghan could earn, and even considered smoking a crime. Despite the Afghans not causing much of the overall disorder, the real financial problem in the war was the system of American contracting. The problem, however, extended beyond local actors. From 2001 to 2007, a report indicated that only 8% of the colossal American financial aid budget went to the Afghan government. The vast majority flowed to private companies, many of which were American-owned. This structure inherently incentivized the continued involvement of American forces and contractors rather than local self-sufficiency. For instance, the Louis Berger Company, an American firm, received a $1.5 billion contract for construction in Kabul and maintained its personnel. Former U.S. Ambassador to Afghanistan, Ryan Crocker, once noted that the lack of accountability among American contractors was a critical problem, stemming from a lack of consciousness at the highest levels. This negligence led to a great deal of disorder and fraud, as he lamented in an email to New York Times journalist Farrar Stockman. Professor Jonathan Goodhand of the University of London further stated that U.S. private firms not only accumulated millions of dollars in Afghanistan, but were also responsible for millions of dollars of disorder. The number of U.S. companies involved in the conflict grew by 50% after the initial war. The scale of the fraud was shocking. The Supreme Group was one of the largest food logistics firms. In 2009, the federal agency, the Defense Logistics Agency, sued the company for a large sum of money. In 2014, the company was ultimately fined $380 million for widespread corruption, yet it quickly resumed operations. The AEI company was another notorious example, sued in January 2008 for $291 million for failing to properly supply war materials to the Afghan National Security Forces. Instead of providing new, modern equipment, the AEI company was found to have delivered outdated 1950s-era weapons, yet it billed the U.S. government for millions of dollars every year. They did not listen to the Americans or the Afghans, prioritizing profit over security. What motivation did these private companies have to end the conflict? The deepest layer of profitability lies with the U.S. defense companies themselves. The U.S. government does not manufacture its own advanced weapons. It contracts the work to corporate giants like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, and General Dynamics. These companies are not just businesses, they are vital, politically influential components of the military-industrial complex. The connection between the military leadership and these firms is undeniable. A 2018 study by Mandy Smith-Berger demonstrated that from 2008 to 2018, the Department of Defense worked directly with over 380 defense contractors. The revolving door between military leadership and corporate boardrooms is clear. General James Mattis is a former director of General Dynamics, which received contracts worth nearly $690,000 in just 3 years. Even more recently, Lloyd Austin, a retired 4-star general and the current Secretary of Defense, sat on the board of Raytheon Company after his military service, a company that received $6 billion in defense contracts over 4 years. These 4 companies, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, and General Dynamics, received a combined total of $9.9 billion from the Department of Defense in a single year. I guarantee you, when war becomes that profitable, you are guaranteed to see more of it. The U.S. government continues to look at how to deal with the demands and influence of titans like Lockheed Martin. The story of Afghanistan's hidden wealth reveals a painful truth. A war fought for security was won by a powerful few who prioritized profit above all else. This animated documentary brings to life the factual details, historical context, and the economic forces that truly shaped the conflict. If you found this deep dive into the business of war compelling, please like this video, share your insights in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more captivating animated history documentaries. Our purpose is to bring history and current events to life in an engaging and accessible way. Remember, all the historical context, events, and facts presented are based on respected historians and journalistic reports, with the relevant references available on screen. Stay tuned for our next episode.